So our lesson today is, what did Jesus teach about growth? You see that on your bulletin? Let's take that together. What did Jesus teach about growth? And what I'd like to do today is, again, just take a look at another parable. And just for parenthetically, remember, a parable is a short story that's intended to convey a spiritual or moral truth. And so I'd like to take another parable that comes from the teachings of the master teacher, and I'd like to maybe just unpack it to see what kind of lessons are stored within it as a means by which to bring us into the growth that God intends for us. How many of you know that it is God's intention for you to be successful? How many of you believe that it is God's desire that you grow and expand and experience the goodness that has been prepared for you? Excellent. And so I want to take a look at someone today who had a little bit of a rough journey coming into this realization, but I believe he'll be instructive for us. And it comes from the Gospel of Luke, and it is Luke 15:11. It's the parable of the prodigal son. I want to read it to you just so we can all be on the same page. And it reads, "Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So his father divided his property between them. A few days later, the son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living." Someone say he squandered his property. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. Someone say he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pig. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating. Someone say he would have gladly filled himself with the pods the pigs were eating. And no one, keep going, gave him anything. Great. But when he came to himself, someone say, but when he came to himself. Oh, that's a good line right there. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up," someone say, get up, "and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of the hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still afar off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine who was dead is alive again. He was lost, and now he was found.' And then they began to celebrate." I am really fond of this narrative of the prodigal son. Truth be told, it's one of my favorite narratives in all of Scripture, because the prodigal son is a prime example of so many of the things we have in common. The prodigal son is an heir to his good. The prodigal son recognizes that there is greatness in him. But the prodigal son is prone to bad decisions. But the prodigal son also recognizes that sometimes you don't have to let a bad decision be your final destination, right? And so the prodigal son knows when it's time to stop playing small. The prodigal son was not too big to apologize, and he shows us that we can turn any mistake into an opportunity to grow. Are you with me? And so what we want to do today is just take a look at some of what the prodigal son did in order to bring himself out of a situation that he created that was too small so that he could be accepted in the place that was just right. What do you do when you realize you've created an experience that's too small for who you are? What do you do when you've created an environment that is unhealthy and doesn't feel good to you? What do you do when you recognize that the place that you find yourself in is no place for a child of God to be? Can I let you in on a little secret? We can do the same thing the prodigal son did. We can decide that this is not where I am staying. Are you with me? One of the things that we all have an opportunity to do is recognize that the experience is not the determination of where we must stay. It's a step in the process of how we must grow. But in order to do that, we must absolutely get our minds in alignment with where it is we decide to be. And you can't be someplace where you haven't preconceived. Are you with me? You've heard me tell this story before. When I was in the Navy, one of the benefits that you get from going on tours overseas is you get to travel. And one of the benefits of travel is you get to secure things that you might not be able to easily get back on this side. And so one of the things that I looked forward to, Earl, when I was traveling was being able to get a set of china for my wife and for my mother and for her mother. And so when we got out to Hong Kong, we were in Kowloon, and the first thing I did was get off the boat and go get in a line to get this china. As I'm standing in line to get the china, some of my guys say to me, we're gonna go on to the Kowloon, but I'll see you in a little bit. So I got my purchase, and I soon caught up with them. Once I caught up with them, we were going down this little side street, and on this side street, there was this tattoo shop. And in this tattoo shop, there were all kinds of tattoos, flags and eagles and everything that you could imagine could be tattooed on your body. But there was this one tattoo that caught my attention, and the tattoo said, "Born Loser." And so I said to the proprietor, "Does anybody actually get that tattoo on their body?" And he said, "Yeah, some people do." And I said, what would make someone get that kind of tattoo on their body? And he said in his broken English, "Before tattoo on body, tattoo in mind." And so the recognition is that before we ever enter an experience in the outer, there has been some sort of conflation with that experience in our minds. And so if you intend to get the most out of the challenges that face you, one of the first things that you must be willing to do is decide. That's our first point, decide. That's the first point, decide. Repeat after me. I am responsible for my decisions and for their outcome. Each and every one of us has a responsibility to be active in our own rescue. And so what the prodigal son did was he recognized that where he was the result of some decisions he made, and if he intended to not be in that spot, he had to make some different decisions. How many of you know, and you can raise your hands, it's a safe space, it's a church, it's okay, nobody's really paying attention to you anyway. How many of you can remember the decision you made that put you in the pickle that you no longer wanted to be in? Yeah, you're in good company. And that challenge began with a decision. But as I said to you moments ago, the very same thing that put you in the pickle can get you out of the pickle. The very same thing that created the difficulty can get you out of the difficulty. The same thing that created the challenge can get you out of the challenge, but we must be willing to make decisions that are consistent with what we want to experience and not where we are. Are you with me? As one great thinker said, the thinker that created this experience is not enlightened enough to create my next experience. So you can't think on the same level of the space that you're in right now. When the prodigal son found himself having spent everything that he had, and listen, it's not as if he was not worthy of it. It's not as if he wasn't a smart cat. It's not as if he didn't even recognize that there was greatness in him. See, prodigal means wasteful, but it also shares a same root or base with the word prodigious. So not only was he wasteful, but he was also brilliant. I don't want you to miss that. Because there's somebody here who considers yourself to be wasteful, but I want you to also recognize that you're brilliant. There's somebody here, you're paying attention to the stuff that you do, but you're missing your greatness. I don't want you to miss your greatness. Because there's greatness in you. And sometimes the challenge is just intended to help you bring the greatness out. Are you with me?